Okay, let's get started. Good morning, Manila time, or good evening or afternoon, wherever you're located from or at. I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar, Reskilling Workers in the E-Mobility Transition. My name is Johanna Siliakus. I work for the Emerging Areas Transport Sector Office at the Asian Development Bank, and I will be moderating today's session for you. If we can have the next slide, please. Today's webinar forms part of this three-webinar series on just transition and gender-related topics in relation to e-mobility. Our webinar series is called Supporting People and Skills in the Just Transition to E-Mobility. This is the second of these sessions. And the last one, Empowering Women as Drivers of Change in the E-Mobility Sector, will take place on the 22nd of April at 2 p.m. And we'll continue the discussion on workforce development there, but with an gender angle. We'll post a registration link in the chat for this, and it is also available from the screen now through the QR code. This webinar is organized under the umbrella of the E-Mobility Support and Investment Platform for Asia and the Pacific. This is an initiative for sharing knowledge, building capacities that ultimately aim to support the scale-up of financing of e-mobility initiatives in the region. The platform is managed by the Asian Development Bank, the ADB, and supported by the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, and UNEP. Recordings of our past online events, including webinars, as well as other materials, can be found on our website, which is at the bottom of the screen, so emobilityplatform.asia. So please do visit that website for more information. And before diving deeper into this session, let me shortly talk you through our house rules for the webinar. So to ensure a smooth session, we have muted your microphones. We should have time at the end of the session to take questions from the audience for the panelists. So you can post any questions you may have through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. It's possible that the Q&A might not be directly visible for you. Then click the More button with the three dots, and you should be able to see the Q&A box there. So you can post us questions throughout the discussion, and then towards the end we'll get to those and try to get as many as possible to the panelists. This webinar is recorded, and the recording will be available on the platform's website, which I mentioned earlier. So moving on to today's session. The shift to electric mobility is transforming jobs across the electric mobility ecosystem in this region, in other regions of the world. Today's webinar session examines how training, how education, workforce development can help in this shift throughout the e-mobility value chain, including manufacturing, transport, vehicle repair, and maintenance. So we'll hear a lot of different angles from mainly South Asia, Southeast Asia, which will give insight on what's already happening on the field. And yes, so we do think that reskilling workers will be really key for ensuring a just and inclusive transition to electric mobility. And today we'll have a really fantastic group of speakers and experts lined up. So we'll start the session with short scene-setting presentations by each of them, and then we'll delve deeper into the topic in a panel discussion with our speakers. And as I said, we will have time for Q&A towards the end. So please share your questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try to pick up most of them towards the end of the session. So let me now introduce all of our speakers to you before we get started. Thanks. Our first speaker is Diana Páez. She leads Just Transition initiatives in her role as Senior Director for Energy and Mobility at the William Davidson Institute of University of Michigan in the US. She specializes in electric mobility, energy transitions, and clean tech innovation across emerging markets and the US as well. And after Diana, we'll hear from Aprajita Verma. She's Senior Program Associate at WRI India. She focuses on research and policy support to support EV adoption and sustainable urban transport. And after this, we'll hear from Sarwono Bawono, so Bowo. He's CEO and co-founder of Spora EV Institute in Indonesia. He focuses on building integrated e-mobility ecosystems in Indonesia, including charging, battery swapping, and fleet solutions. And then we'll move towards the Philippines context and hear from Kathleen de Matera. She's coordinator of the thematic hubs at the Urban Living Lab Center, which is part of the Urban Electric Mobility Initiative. She works on capacity building and stakeholder engagement for sustainable urban mobility and energy transition. And last but not least, we will hear from the Thai context presented by Jack Crawford, Associate Economic Affairs Officer at the UN ESCAP. He works on just transition to electric mobility with a focus on workforce development and low carbon transport. So without further ado, let me now hand over to Diana for the first presentation, which will give a nice overview of the topic of reskilling and why it's important for a just e-mobility transition. So over to you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It is really a pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm excited for this great discussion and to learn from different experiences. So as you indicated, I'm going to share my screen, just a few slides, quite short, just to frame the conversation a little bit around skilling and reskilling for electric mobility and how in different markets we can navigate the internal combustion engine to electric vehicle workforce transition. So first and foremost, I guess, the first key message here for me, based on our work across emerging markets on electric vehicle transition, is that there are many implications as we shift from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, both across production and adoption. This means that we have systems that were designed for and based around internal combustion engine are changing and adapting to a new EV paradigm. This means that we're moving from gasoline engine being the core of the vehicle towards batteries, charging infrastructure. We see a lot of incumbent or legacy companies focused on internal combustion engine on one hand, and in another hand, emerging companies, new startups that are quite focused on electric mobility solutions, and a lot of innovation happening in this space. This also means, of course, that the current workforce that we have in different places that has the skills for internal combustion engine systems and for that entire ecosystem now must transition towards a workforce that is equipped for electric vehicle production and adoption, maintenance, etc. So all of the different steps of the value chain. And speaking of the value chain, there are substantive changes there too when we think about going from ICE to EVs. So we're talking about a different technology, fundamentally speaking, and production processes that impact vehicle systems, the manufacturing process that has a lot of different implications. So as with any technology transition, even though there are some challenges and some aspects of the current system that will eventually phase out and change, it also opens new opportunities for new business models, opportunities for entrepreneurs, of course, opportunities for different players, and new rules of the game, right? We talk about an e-mobility ecosystem in that there are a lot of new players, there are a lot of new considerations that we need to take into account for e-mobility to actually progress in a particular context. And so this means change that needs to be managed. And at the very core and center of this transition is the people that will actually make this change function and work out, or that could potentially be an element that really hinders this transition. And so the point here is that along the entire value chain, when we think about this transformation, jobs and functions and occupations will change. In this matrix, we have here just a visual of thinking through some of the, as we go through that transition, there are losses or there are parts of especially internal combustion engine value chain that begin to phase out, to be reduced over time. Certainly, this will be a long-term process, in some markets more accelerated than in others. But we will see, and we expect to see, that there will be a decrease on the types of jobs that involve internal combustion ICE specific component. For example, component manufacturers, ICE vehicle manufacturing and assembly, workshop mechanics, which are really a key consideration, of course, in Asia Pacific, but also in other regions. If we think about petrol station attendants that are also prevalent in many emerging markets, after service jobs, transport operators, depending on the particular context and in the particular transport system. There might be different stakeholders whose livelihoods and jobs depend on parts of the ICE value chain that are particularly at risk as this transition progresses and advances. And in contrast, we see, and we will continue to see, a lot of EV gains along the entire value chain. So now we have aspects related to the battery and battery manufacturing and opportunities and new jobs and new skills that are needed to support this change. So we have charging infrastructure, of course, EV manufacturing, assembly, training for EV related functions, technicians, certainly. Even in some markets, we think about and talk about salespeople who actually understand EV technology and can actually sell and conduct consumer education around these vehicles. We also have opportunities and new jobs that are created in terms of EV and grid integration and all of that interaction between, mobility and energy systems, charging stations, battery swapping systems operation or stations, battery second life, and of course, battery recycling. So whatever happens with the battery at the end of life too. So we see aspects again and parts that are phasing out, and then new parts that are in jobs that are being created as well. The impact on jobs will be, there will be new competencies and functions that are needed. And as I mentioned, new areas that open up. What we are seeing so far is that this transformation is quite uneven. It's not happening at the same time and at the same pace in every market or region. There's a lot of learning that can be gained precisely from observing what's happening in different contexts. And then the timing of these and the speed of the shift is really a function of accelerators. And I think we will talk more about these, but certainly policy drivers, market drivers, specific conditions in a particular market, and also barriers. If there are inadequate policies or limited infrastructure, or perhaps not as much political will or a policy or political framework that is really conducive to the transition to e-mobility. But one way or another, the point is that as we move through this transition, there's a big impact and big implications for jobs and jobs changes. And with that, with those changes, of course, the requirement for new or different skills really comes to the surface. So we need new skills to support electric vehicles and the entire electric vehicle ecosystem. And here in this visual, I was trying to sort of illustrate a little bit. If you think about the entire value chain, starting with design and development of electric vehicles, they have different considerations in terms of integration, new principles around vehicle design, and then thinking about of course raw materials for what will become the battery later on, and all the way through the value chain until we think about disposing and aftermarket, to put it that way, of the vehicle. we can talk about different types of skills that are needed from the baseline of internal combustion engine types of skills that we are used to and that we are very familiar with. And so this might be not, I'm not going to read all of this, but it might be related to electrical components integration, to running diagnostics, different types of optimization. There might be skills related to building, installing, maintaining, charging infrastructure, depending on what that infrastructure might look like in a particular country, whether it is battery swapping stations or public charging stations. Again, integration with the grid, lots of different considerations for which we need different types of skills. Specialized technicians with different skills too, and equipped with those, particularly related to safety and some other aspects are needed to provide maintenance for different types of electric vehicles. This is a key area of growth as well and an opportunity for training and retraining. We have complex battery and high voltage systems. There's a big emphasis on software, certainly, because it is so central to the electric vehicle itself and to integrating all of the different systems. And then, as I mentioned too, towards the end of life, so there's a big part around recycling, certainly for batteries, for different parts, and then just ensuring that batteries and other components are handled properly, reused, repurposed, or recycled. So all of these different aspects to be able to sustain this value chain requires and will continue to require new or different skills to support this transition. And then just a call out, I know that specifically for the battery, if we go into the battery, that's a whole different and much more comprehensive value chain as well, that with different parts and components that also require different types of skills. And I know that Prijita is going to talk about that in more detail. So how do we make this transition work? I'm excited to discuss with my co-panelists and also hear questions from the audience today. But certainly, we are going to be talking about the need to assess the skill gaps that exist in a particular place, because without having a really clear picture of what skills are actually needed, what skills already exist, what skills are transferable versus not, and really thinking about how to ground this on the employer. And I will be bringing this point back up quite a bit because of my focus on work with private sector as part of this transition too. So that's a really important point, how to be able to assess the skill gaps to ensure that the training investments are actually right on target. And we can think about and discuss how can we know ahead of time? How can we prepare for that? Who is responsible for assessing the skills, etc.? What does that look like? The second part is retraining workers. Certainly, we talk about upskilling and reskilling. So reskilling the existing workforce is really a strategic investment and crucial for a just EV transition. And we need to think about workers all along the supply chain that will need new skills to participate in this shift. So what kinds of skills? Who should provide this training? Whose responsibility is it? Those are all questions that we will be pondering as well. Excuse me. And last, developing the talent pipeline. Along with retraining workers, the EV transition also requires building a new generation of workers, really, who enter the industry with the skills to support the deployment of this technology. So this is when we think about new programs, credentials that can help prepare newer generations of professionals, technicians, etc., that can support the transition to e-mobility. And here we need to think about how educational institutions or training providers can develop this pipeline, what types of programs are best suited for different needs and different contexts and goals related to this transition to electric mobility. So I'll stop there with my slides and again, look forward to discussing with the rest of the panelists and delving into this topic in more detail.
Thank you so much, Diana. I think this was an excellent setting of the scene for our discussion. We'll definitely discuss further what you just mentioned on mapping the skills gap, on what skills are needed, how do we identify this, how do we do this on time, as well as collaborating with training providers, education institutions. So that also brings in the whole educational sector to this complex kind of picture that you mentioned on the supply chain, which is quite complex, but I like that you're also highlighting the opportunities that come with this. So there's always two sides of the coin. So there will be losses of jobs, but also opportunities along the different parts of the value chain. And yes, I also thought it was nicely said that the people are at the center of the transition. So if we don't kind of think about how we can or how people can adapt to this change, it will not take place in a just manner. So I think that's a very important message as well. Thank you, Diana. So we'll get back to you at the discussion. Now, I would like to hand over to Aprajita Verma from WRI India. She will be providing us, well, an India perspective, but also talking us through more in detail the battery manufacturing perspective or the battery part of the value chain, as Diana mentioned. So over to you, Aprajita. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. Could we have the presentation up? Thank you, Diana, for setting the context on how skill needs are changing as we transition from ICVs to EVs. So I will be talking about skill gaps and skilling opportunities for India's e-mobility transition with a focus on India's EV battery sector. So to start off, I want to start off with a general statement. Many countries around the world today are grappling with three key challenges: energy transition, energy security, and job creation. As one of the fastest growing economies, India's success in tackling these challenges will be contingent on timely and prudent interventions with a long-term view. Now, with that statement, let's deep dive into the presentation. Next slide, please. So India is seeing rapid growth in EV adoption across private, commercial, and public transport segments. A share of EVs in total vehicle sales has increased from 0.7% in 2020 to over 8% in 2025. With India's dual push on EV adoption as well as indigenization of the supply chain through national and subnational schemes, the automotive sector in India now stands at a pivotal juncture. The transition from ICVs to EVs is not only reshaping vehicle technologies, but also creating demand for new and specialized skills across the EV lifecycle, as highlighted by the previous speaker. For India to achieve 45% indigenization of the EV supply chain and upwards of 2 lakh skilled professionals for this supply chain, we will require skilling as a key enabler. Now, building a strong talent pipeline for India's EV transition can open doors to a twin opportunity. One, to reduce import dependence and boost domestic supply chains. And second, to simultaneously create livelihood opportunities across R&D, production engineering, quality assurance, monitoring, and end-of-life management. So India's ability to harness the employment dividend of this EV transition will depend on building a strong talent pipeline through focused skilling interventions. Next slide, please. So at the core of this transition lies the EV battery, which accounts for 40 to 50% of the vehicle cost, and it is critical for an EV's performance and range. So EV batteries are one of the most complex, cost-intensive, and rapidly evolving subsystem, which is driving immense innovation and value addition for an EV. So given the strategic importance of EV batteries and India's policy push to localize the EV battery value chain, in this presentation, we will look at an in-depth assessment of present and future skill requirements across the EV battery ecosystem. Next slide, please. So lithium ion is the go-to chemistry for EV batteries in India and worldwide. So India's LIB market is experiencing rapid growth. So annual demand for LIBs is expected to increase from 10.8 gigawatt hour in 2020 to 160 gigawatt hour by 2030. What does that mean? So that means by 2030, the cumulative LIB demand will be 600 gigawatt hour, considering a base case scenario. And EVs will drive up a large chunk of this demand, which is 63% of this demand. Next slide, please. So currently, India has historically imported lithium-ion batteries and cells. The trade data shows that imports of lithium-ion batteries and cells are on an upward trend and have reached close to $3 billion in previous financial years. India is likely to remain reliant on imports until local cell production scales up. There's also an interesting trend. India has begun exporting fully assembled LIVs in recent years to key automotive hubs such as Germany and Japan. These exports have increased from $97 million in 2022-23 to $138 million in 23-24, indicating potential room for further growth. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so India has been enhancing the previous one, sorry. Yeah, one before this. Yeah, this one. So India has been enhancing its domestic LIV manufacturing and recycling capabilities to reduce import dependence and indigenize the value chain. India's EV battery demand is accelerating rapidly across vehicle segments, particularly for two-wheeler and three-wheeler, and there is growing momentum in four-wheeler and heavy-duty vehicles as well. So current domestic battery manufacturing capacity stands at approximately 19 gigawatt-hour for pack assembly and 2 gigawatt-hour for electrode and cell production. Now, India targets at least 45% indigenization of the EV battery manufacturing value chain by 2030. This is to achieve its target of 30% EV penetration by 2030. The battery value chain alone can generate anywhere between 58,000 to 91,000 jobs by 2030. This employment opportunity will span across cell manufacturing, pack assembly, active material production, and ancillary services. Many of these roles are very technical, high value, and manufacturing intensive. Next slide, please. So the demand is rising, capacity is expanding, and job opportunities are emerging. But realizing this opportunity depends on building a future-ready battery workforce. So next slide, please. So in this context, we'll now look at an in-depth assessment of emerging job roles and skill requirements across this value chain. So India's battery ecosystem is currently assembly-led, as you can see in this infographic here. Right, there's high localization for 3 midstream and downstream stages currently in India. So Indian companies largely import battery cells and manufacture modules and battery packs using their proprietary technology, particularly for two-wheeler and three-wheeler segments. It's also emerging for other vehicle segments. So repair, module swap, and repurposing for second life applications and stationary storage is also at a nascent but rapidly evolving stage. For upstream and downstream stages that you see here, there is a wave of investment that's coming up in domestic cell and cell component manufacturing, as well as recycling services. And several key players are laying the foundation for supplying key battery materials to India's EV and energy storage industry. So the growing ecosystem for LIVs is highlighting the need for skilled workforce and skilling programs across every link of this value chain. Next slide, please. So to understand why does skill shortage occur and what does skill shortage look like, we take a look at some of the building blocks of the skilling landscape. This is a snapshot of how regulatory and industry-led bodies, which is sector skill councils, develop qualification-linked skilling pathways. These qualification-linked skilling pathways are called occupational standards. They are responsible for guiding the development and delivery of skilling programs in India, which ranges from workshops, micro-credentials, diploma, higher degree programs for skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. So to break this down, in the beginning, we have national occupational standards, which are performance benchmarks for a job function. A set of NOS will create a qualification pack, which is an industry-validated document which defines a job role. Now, a qualification pack creates a model curriculum, which is a training framework. And based on this training framework, different skilling institutions will develop their training programs. Next slide, please. So currently, what does this look like for India's EV battery industry? So sector skill councils have rolled out qualification packs to encourage EV battery specific training for blue and white collar job roles. You can see the existing QPs on this slide. So these existing QPs cater to the midstream and downstream stages of the battery value chain. These are the stages where we have highest localization in India. However, there is limited operationalization of these standards into training programs by academic, educational, and vocational institutes. And there's also a lack of occupational standards in other parts of the value chain, as you can see, right? Next slide. So now talking about skill gaps and opportunities across this ecosystem, India is currently facing a shortage of specialized engineers, specifically process and equipment engineers and technicians, which is material and precision technicians for gigawatt and multi-gigawatt hour battery cell production. There's also a shortage of skill talent with applied and industry relevant knowledge across battery pack design, assembly, battery management, and thermal management systems, as well as repair and maintenance services. So entry-level candidates often possess theoretical knowledge and basic lab skills, but they lack practical understanding of battery systems, high voltage operations, system integration, and so on. So what happens due to this is that it results in prolonged on-the-job training and upskilling requirements, which increases onboarding time and cost for the industry. And that is also the reason why we have high reliance on foreign talent in these segments currently. So traditional automotive technicians who are trained on 12-watt vehicle architecture are currently unprepared for EV systems operating at much higher pack voltages. So there's also insufficient knowledge of BMS operations, high voltage safety, controller area network-based communication protocols, diagnostics, troubleshooting, and so on. So what we see here is skill gaps across upstream, midstream, and downstream stages of the battery value chain. Apart from these skill gaps, we also see limited operationalization of existing qualification standards, which we saw in the previous slides. And what we are seeing is there's an emerging need to develop more qualification standards in upstream, midstream, and downstream stages of the value chain. So in the near to mid-term, it would be essential to encourage targeted skilling programs to bridge these skilling gaps and to sort of seize the opportunity to skill talent for upcoming skill needs. So the lithium-ion, another factor to highlight here is the lithium-ion cell manufacturing requires stringent quality control, and that is the reason it necessitates the development of a tailored EHS protocol, which is an environment, health, and safety protocol. So current practices rely on generic industry safety guidelines, but lithium-ion battery production has unique thermal, electrical, and chemical risks. But then that is the reason we require a dedicated EHS protocol for lithium-ion battery manufacturing in India. So because of these talent shortages, we are not only slowing down localization and capacity expansion, we are also facing delays in innovation and increasing our operational safety and compliance risks. Next slide, please. So as India's EV battery industry grows, there is a strong demand for cross-disciplinary talent. We need specialized higher education tracks in electrochemistry, material science, and mechatronics, which will be essential to build a domestic battery expertise. And as the EV battery ecosystem moves towards more advanced data-driven and digitally connected technologies such as cloud BMS and digital twins, we will also need cloud BMS developers, battery data scientists, thermal management engineers, circularity designers, as well as life cycle assessment specialists. So these trends highlight the demand for hybrid skills that span hardware, software, data analytics, and sustainability practices. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. Thank you for staying with me here so far. So while skilling institutions and academic institutions and industry partners have developed education and skilling programs across various levels, the depth and scale of these offerings remain insufficient relative to the pace of the industry growth. So there is an urgent need to significantly expand these offerings in order to create a strong pipeline of industry-ready talent at both entry-level, mid-level, and advanced level roles for the value chain. There should also be emphasis on building specialized battery skills across the spectrum. So which would cover hands-on battery assembly, BMS and BTMS operations, battery behavior, degradation analysis, battery failure analysis, and so on. So one of the ways to do this would be embedding fundamental EV and battery courses into undergraduate engineering curriculum, which can create a larger baseline of battery literate graduates. And to build autonomy and indigenize the battery value chain, we will also need to look at strategic R&D hubs and centers of excellence through government, academia, and industry partnerships. For the workforce that's currently active, we will need blended learning models combining self-paced digital modules, live online sessions, and on-site hands-on training which can enable the working professionals to upskill without leaving employment. So in sum, we need structured industry-academia collaboration, we need multi-partner initiatives, and we need shared training infrastructure to scale skilling efforts and strengthen the overall battery workforce ecosystem. To conclude, first we need to understand the industry demand, then we need to build structured skilling pathways to address that demand, and we also need to strengthen the systems that deliver these skilling programs to help build a future and inclusive workforce for India's EV transition. I would end here and happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prachita, for this really insightful look at the battery value chain and the skills needed there. It's always interesting to see what's happening in India, which is a big player in e-mobility, obviously. And very interesting with this, or a very structured approach, which I liked. Proper analysis of the needs of the skills needed, as well as this kind of analysis on the multi-partner initiatives that are needed between academic institutions, the private sector, etc., which I think we'll also be discussing a bit later on. So thank you so much, Prachita, for this. We'll have you back on for the panel discussion. And let me now hand over to Sarwono Bawono, or Bowo, from Spora EV Institute, who will be taking us to the Indonesia context, looking at training programs and curriculum alignment for technicians of two-wheeled EVs. So over to you, Bowo. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Very interesting insight from India. So actually, we are experiencing the same actually in Indonesia. And continuing to that context, I would like to share with you our experience in developing a cluster talent pool for EV classroom in Indonesia. The urgent need for our perspective in Indonesia is because at this moment there are already 300,000 vehicles already on the street, and we are experiencing difficulties in after sales. That's why our focus of initiative starting off on the two-wheelers, the EV technician. So to put in the context, Indonesia is now, we are trying to we have subsidy of $44 billion per year for using oil. So that are the main reason of transitioning into EV. And government ambition is to have 15 million electric vehicle on the street by 2030. So our analysis that we need around 150,000 technicians in Indonesia by 2030. We are doing training since 2023, and it comes to the conclusion that we need to infuse our training module into existing ecosystem of vocational school all over Indonesia, which already have 13,000 schools already. If we want to make industrialization go smooth in Indonesia. So another problem is if we take a look into several pilots in Indonesia with government, industry, academic, and society, there are lack of understanding of EV technology itself, in the technology side, on the manpower side. So this is about a chicken and egg situation actually. If we don't understand technology, we don't have any capabilities to develop manpower. So that's why in Spora EV, we developed Spora Institute to close the gap. Our dream is to develop EV, of course, but in Indonesia, we cannot sell just a car or motorcycle without building ecosystem. So we need people to develop the ecosystem. So that's why we develop the technology, and also we develop manpower in order to reduce the impact. If we do business as usual, we don't develop manpower, the impact will be not good for the industry itself. As for now, lacking of technician, making the consumer reluctant to switch into EVs, yeah, and that makes the government target more difficult, yeah, and that's why we develop EV ecosystem in Spora. We have Spora Institute since 2023 as a training center, policy study, ecosystem enabler to help the government, to help all parties understand the technology better, and we also develop our own module, our own curriculum that's being infused into the vocational school as for now. We also develop Spora Prima, a network of workshop. Currently have still in pilot mode in Bali, and hopefully we can replicate it into other areas as well. We do also R&D to develop our own vehicle, two-wheelers and four-wheelers, and we also develop digital platform. So this is our ecosystem as a solution for EV ecosystem in Indonesia. And our roadmap, this is the short term. We develop SKKK. SKKK is a standard competencies, yeah, for technician. It's already being proposed to the government, hopefully being released soon. And with this, we can have government certified for EV technician. And we already have synchronized the curriculum to infuse our module to standard national curriculum for vocational school in Indonesia. Hopefully, with this combined the standard competencies and the module, we can have it infused into the national curriculum of the 13,000 SMK very soon. And next is how can we infuse the curriculum? We have project with North Jakarta City, South Tangerang, and West Java. So this is a collaborative effort actually between the government, between Association of Industry, ASMOLI, yeah, and TREF, and also the certification body to have this ecosystem in the closed loop. And this is our idea of having the closed ecosystem for EV technician, because coming from our experience, it's very hard to find the right talents, and it takes time to develop talents, around 6 months. And with this schematic, we can have collaboration with industry association to have on-the-job training for technician being trained in vocational schools. We can monitor them, and we can also help other industry as well to choose the right talent for their needs. And for the students, at the end of the day, they have two options actually. One, they can work, yeah, with the industry, and also they can have a choice to become independent technician. It is very common now in Indonesia. We have independent technician. They can set up their own business, and we are engaging financial institution also to help with the capital working for the students that already have certification. So the idea is to have this closed loop ecosystem where the industry can easily choose the right talent for them, and hopefully we can have this to help the industry to develop their business. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, we cannot do this ourselves. Yeah. We have partners from education institution, technology partners, government, NGOs also. We have support from B4G, Firia, and TREF, Muhammadiyah, yeah? And also we have support from industry associations such as ASMOLI, ITS Indonesia, ED Battery, and IML. So this becoming a collaborative effort, yeah, that this initiative. I think that's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks for giving us this insight on the on the practicalities that you're working with the training. Really a good example of different types of organization working together, including the government and industry and educational system. So that's really great to see. And I think it's also I like the point that you made that you kind of are embedding training in existing educational ecosystems and making sure that it's actually becomes kind of part of the standard competencies and ensuring that the government can then also certify people doing those trainings. So yes, that's very interesting to see. So thanks a lot for this. Let us move forward to the next presentation so we have enough time for the discussion as well. So next we'll have Kathleen de Matera. She'll take us through the Philippines experience on reskilling workers for EV servicing and EV charging infrastructure. So Kathleen, without further ado, let me hand over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. And I believe my slide will be presented also from the side. Let's get that out. But while that is loading, good morning, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Kathleen from Urban Electric Mobility Initiative, or UEMI. And I am working on a GEF-funded project in the Philippines and Global Environment Facility. Next slide, please. We are a consortium partner. So UEMI is a consortium partner alongside EV Association of the Philippines, De La Salle University, and Clean Air Asia, and who serves our consortium lead. And this project is implemented through the UNIDO, so United Nations Industrial Development Organization, in partnership with the Trade and Industry Development Ministry and the Board of Investment. Yeah, so as you can see here, our orientation is a bit more towards that industry development. So this project runs until next year, so we have a year to go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about capacity building and focus on that. There are a lot of components here. And so next slide. One of our focus is on building the workforce needed to support that transition to e-mobility. So that's in particular through technician training, but with just 1 year left in the project, we are prioritizing institutionalization, sustainability, and scalability. So we have a lot of questions like, how do we do this? So as you've seen from previous presentations, so it's like you have the battery, you have all the different parts. So how are we doing that? And what are we finding out so far? And next slide. And maybe just to help link this conversation from the previous speakers, they allowed us to see foundational or ponder on foundational questions. So even from the onset, we heard from Diana, you talked about what kind of training and who should provide this training and how can training institutions or training providers be part of this. And we haven't even we haven't gotten to that point of talking about the next gen workforce requirements, but how do we ready that and how do we move towards the battery-ready workforce? So next slide. I want to talk briefly about the 3 key points here to anchor our approach on, to anchor our strategy and lessons learned on. So here you will see technical gaps, institutional gaps, and sustainability gaps. Next slide. Briefly, technical gaps for the next slide. In the Philippines, we face a lack or limited modular industry-aligned training programs for EV servicing, EV charging station operations. Certification pathways still ongoing, so that's being developed, but these emerging roles, it's not fully there yet, So that creates barriers to workforce readiness. And next is the institutional gaps. And related to what I just mentioned, we have gaps in trainers or faculty capacity, faculty number, curriculum alignment with industry needs, and the infrastructure for hands-on training, because you need equipment, or you go to the TVET in these training institutions, you need laboratories or labs, no, e-mobility labs, think of it that way. And our experience in the Philippines, it taught us that there's so much realignment and coordination that go into that, defining the competencies and skills needed, as you've seen in previous in speakers before me, and so on and so forth. So here I'm referring to both the technical gap and also institutional gap. Yeah, next slide. So all of these are kind of like the root causes, as we found out, or the foundational issues like of this issue of this workforce unpreparedness. Yeah. Next slide, and next two slides, I will not dive into this detail. But my just the point I want to make here is that we already have what we need to know to understand that we're going to need the workforce in these areas. In the Philippines, we have the national roadmaps that signals this, signals the industry, signals the workforce needs, and it's been ongoing, the discussion on workforce development. So I won't go into the detail there. And the next slide, you also see some graphs. Maybe I'll focus on the approach and the how from the project. But just the main point here is that despite this progress, despite the, and it's been a decade that we've been having the public transport modernization or the shift to e-mobility, and then we've seen an increase in private passenger vehicles that are EVs. The workforce supporting that sector that remains underdeveloped. Next slide. So our approach in capacity building is we go back to the three gaps that I mentioned earlier. So the technical, institutional, sustainability, and we want to help bridge that gap. So even the questions that we were trying to address whenever we meet with stakeholders, like how do we do this? Could you guide how, based on what you've experienced so far, what works, what doesn't work? And I also want to add here, because we recently had a women consultation. So in March, we gathered select people just to outline a few challenges and opportunities in the workforce development for women. These challenges are even compounded by stereotypes or by cultural norms that frame the technical work or the technician work as masculine. So perhaps some of you would have similar challenges on that part, the inclusivity part. And during that consultation, the women highlighted that need for really targeted outreach, targeted support, like scholarships for women, for the technical training programs, so that we can encourage their participation. Yeah, so that's just one bit that I want to add there. Next slide. So our approach in capacity building, as a time-bound project, we are not directly able to train the technicians ourselves. Instead, our ambition became this: to develop and turn over industry-aligned training modules to the training institutions. So we have been speaking with training providers now. So next, and this is our target outcome. We want a nationally recognized micro-credential pathways for EV-related skills, and we want that institutionalized. Next. The challenge here lies in ensuring that these modules are actually adopted, institutionalized, and scaled beyond the project duration. Next slide, just outlining who have we been engaging with. And this is probably to showcase our experience, because it may also spark ideas if you're implementing something similar in your cities, in your countries. We learned that by engaging these stakeholders, we are creating this collaborative ecosystem. So last year we had, I don't know, so let's go through this one by one. So we have the training institutions, of course, first and foremost. The agency looking after the education and tech voc, industry-based academies. So here we spoke with the likes of Don Bosco, Mandaluyong. So if anyone is also local, so that's the kind of training institutions that we're also speaking with, and other training providers that are industry-based. They deliver automotive programs, and they can help deliver the EV specific programs and build the capacity of trainers and have these facilities. Next, we have the industry partners. We have the EV manufacturers, the EVCS providers, other private sector players. They help us define fully the competencies and skills required. So we met them like week after week last year, every Thursdays, every Friday, spending a whole day with the industry partners to define what's needed, what are the pain points, and how do we create the sort of the foundational or the gateway course, because of course these industries would have their proprietary information, no? But how do we build like the general education? How do we address that part? Where do we come in? How do we come in? And next is the national government agencies, the trade and industry, the Board of Investments, and those are other agencies that are supporting the policy, the standards, the workforce development. And they provide this regulatory and institutional framework for scaling trainings. Then we have the development agencies and the banks, the likes of, say, ADB, NIDO, and other organizations. They provide these financial, of course, and the technical support for upgrading training institutions, perhaps, or helps us leverage resources so that we can deliver this and amplify our impact. Next, we have the local government units. These are very important parts in the Philippines. Just one back first. I'll just finish the last bit there. The local government units and the municipalities and cities implementing the initiatives. We have also the transport cooperative. These are the fleet operators, public transport providers, and also organizations and in the region. So you have EV associations in Southeast Asia, at least that I know of. So we try to ensure that the capacity building that we have here that can meet regional standards, for example. And there are many challenges related to this even. In Manila, the focus of e-mobility transition had always been the public transport modernization. And so the last few bits here that you see on the screen, the local government units, the transport cooperatives, they're the key players here in the transition. They are particularly managing fleets, operating EV charging stations alongside, or at least looking at this alongside the private sector. But their level of involvement and specific training needs that remain unclear. So how do we harmonize the trainings provided at that level so that they can also align with nationally recognized certification pathways? So that they can move, across, they can move up, they can feel empowered, they are going to be confident to speak with the bigger players who are entering, let's say, their cities, no? Next slide. So we have 3 focus areas in our capacity building, and I hope this spark ideas. I think you kind of need to click next. The one that is on top. There you go. The micro credentials and working with training providers. This is our first bit here, and that includes defining competencies and skills and module development. And so this one, the module development, as I said, we worked alongside the industry. We set up this industry TWG working group so that they can help. They're the subject matter experts. They're also familiar with what's emerging now in the market, because the goal here is we want to align everything with industry needs and real world needs, no? And next is the institutional partnership, and this is we're working very closely with the training institutions like the TESDA, you see, Technical Education and Skills Development Authority. We're collaborating with industry-based academies, and that partnership allows us to focus on aligning curricula with national standards, national framework, and building perhaps faculty capacity, trainer capacity. So now we're trying to look at it from the training of trainers perspective. Like, how do we make sure that we have the subject matter experts, the industry, supporting the training institutions, the faculty in all of this? How do we bridge that? How do we facilitate that? And of course, upgrading training infrastructure. That's something that we need to look into also as well. Next is the last focus areas is the women engagement and empowerment, like who are underrepresented in the workforce. That includes like the network creation so that we can focus on the women in the workforce. Are they in the local government, research, industry, fleet management? We want to bring them on board. We also learned this concept of men as allies, so that they can support in the knowledge transfer. And then that also includes the IEC and campaigns to support the training institutions and also their recruitment. Last couple of slides. So in the next slide, you will see the micro credentials. So this kind of helps, from the previous presentations also. What are we focusing on right now in the project is we have these and these modules are being prepared over the summer, over the next 2-3 months, and we met with industry champions so many times last year to tackle each topic for a day every week, just to give you an idea how that looks like from implementation perspective, and how they were supportive also and collaborative from the onset, no? And the next slide is just for me to summarize a few lessons learned and a few takeaways. And bear with me with this because I want to just dive into the experience here. And the first is the collaboration is key to institutionalization. Partnerships with training institutions like the TechVoc, Skills Authority, like the Don Bosco, Mandaluyong, other industry-based partners that has shown that aligning with existing national frameworks and institutional priorities, that's really critical for sustainability. Like everything pointed to that. Every capacity building, every 3-hour training, 3-hour discussion points back to that. Like how do we make sure that it's not just ad hoc training programs or seminars, and it allows them to go up, allows them to get certified? It goes back to that question, like how do we make sure that it's not just another certificate, etc. No, so and with that, we learned was early engagement with these stakeholders on the ground that helped us ensure the buy-in and that smoother collaboration, no, of these training modules. The second is the industry alignment drives relevance, and developing these micro credential programs, the topics with input from subject matter experts and industry TWG. So I talked about this, us gathering these industry or private sector partners, so that we can ensure that training modules are addressing real world needs, because they were able to guide us that we need this competency. The thing is, they have to be separate from this other competency because they're different technicians. So it's down to that level, that discussion that happens in these conversations. And we were able to tailor and create something that would bridge us, that would become the gateway course, like a tailored EV 101 module. So it's like a gen ed course, no, in the university. Like how do you go up to have a specialization? Next 3 points is the third is, next slide, is the flexibility and scalability. That's also essential. And the modular stackable credentials, it allows these workforce to upskill progressively, and it allows us to think of it from the user, from the trainee perspective, like how do make sure that these are accessible to diverse groups, like if they're going to transition from other industries. Last is this inclusive and an inclusive approach and women engagement and men as allies, like in the actively engaging the women in workforce development. We did a targeted grassroots outreach, and that focused on the stakeholders that I showed earlier. So who are the 4 local government units that we can talk to about this? Yeah. And the last is institutional capacity building is a long-term investment. We spent years to do this, to even identify the modules that we need to develop, and supporting these training institutions with trainer development, faculty development, curriculum updates, infrastructure updates. That would be essential and key for delivering these EV-specific programs. And the last bit there in bold, building institutional readiness, it really takes time. But that's something that we learned to be foundational for scaling and sustaining these workforce development efforts. So That's all. On behalf of UMI e-mobility ASAP project, I invite you all, whether you present government, industry, training institutions, or development organization, to collaborate and to continue this conversation with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for bringing in this perspective. And I think this already shows a lot of interesting aspects on the partnerships, on building these partnerships across across sectors, basically, and across different types of institutions. Really key, as we've seen also in the other presentations, and also this aspect on institutionalization and embedding embedding these kind of curricula and the modules into existing educational systems. I think that's really interesting to see this practical example. So thanks so much for that, Kathleen. And let us move forward with the final presentation before the panel discussion. So we will have Jack Crawford from ESCAP presenting us on on an urban level in Bangkok, taking us through what ESCAP has been working on in this field there. So thank you. Over to you, Jack.
Thank you so much, Johanna. I think clearly there is so much to be said on this topic. So I hope to build on these fabulous discussions and maybe zoom in a little bit to our experience at ESCAP working on reskilling in Bangkok in Thailand. So just a bit of a broad overview of our flagship initiative in this city. We're working with the International Labour Organization and the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration on e-mobility workforce development. And specifically in the city, we have a focus on just transition. I don't think it needs much of a definition, but I'll give it a go anyway. It essentially means that everybody should benefit or have access to the right skills, training, opportunities, and protections in the sector. And we're taking a very multifaceted approach to this. So we're trying to hit it at all angles, you could say. We've been going about 1 year so far, and this is a multi-year initiative. So in the space of that year, what we've done is first, and I'll bring a laser up on my screen, we first established this Bangkok Roundtable for Just EV Transition. This serves as the working group for our project. We found it an incredibly effective way for bringing all stakeholders together from 5 national ministries, the local government, CSOs, workforce representatives in the private sector. And we discussed different perspectives on things like training, future skills needs, as well as aligning on how we will approach our outputs for the project in the future. One of the great things coming out of these working groups is that we've built spin-off activities and initiatives, one of which was the Empower E-Mobility Challenge, where we invited students in the city to submit to us ideas about how to make electric mobility more inclusive. Now, that could cover things like infrastructure, but also about how we can train people and get young people or whoever, whichever demographic, involved in careers in electric mobility. And over 170 students submitted ideas to us in that competition. We were actually really pleased to offer many of those students work shadowing opportunities with some of the sponsors of the competition, which include Energy Absolute, MoveMe, Thai Smile Bus, which are leading e-mobility companies in Bangkok. And many of them, having never really known about electric mobility in the past, left those experiences wanting to know more, or at least having an entry route into the sector. So building on this momentum, we have a series of outputs coming up this year, a toolkit report. We've done an impact analysis, which I will present some analysis on very soon. And we're also developing a vocational training course for electric mobility with the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration. So it sounds like some of the panelists, Kathleen, etc., are maybe a bit ahead of us on that, and I'm sure we could take some learning from you on there. So I want now just to move on to some of the analysis we've done. I mentioned that we had produced an impact analysis. It's not yet released. It's in final draft form, but I can share some of the data with you anyway. So this serves as a bit of a core basis for understanding the workforce landscape in Bangkok. and for any of our future outputs, how we are going to approach them. So the impact analysis was designed in collaboration with the local government and focuses on aspects of their value chain that they have some influence and control over. So planning, operations, maintenance, and end of life. So to understand the workforce in Bangkok across these subsectors, we estimated there's around 20,000 jobs already in the city linked to the EV transition. The overwhelming majority of these are in the operation stage, particularly drivers. And building on that, we've looked at how job demand is likely to evolve. So in the short term, it's mainly for practical roles covering repair technicians, charging staff, and trainers. But over time, this will shift to more advanced roles like power electronics, software systems, and battery management. I think a key takeaway here is that when we think about reskilling, it should respond to the immediate gaps now, but also prepare for these advanced skills in the future, skills which can take many years to build or qualify for. And the impacts on the current workforce won't necessarily be evenly distributed. We found that there are several areas of the ICE value chain which will be disproportionately affected, notably taxi drivers and small garages. If you can imagine taxi drivers using ICE vehicles, and they'll eventually face higher costs, more competition around more modern, cleaner fleets, and garages. So mechanics will risk losing customers if they can't afford the equipment, or if they can't afford to train their employees. And I think this is where a just transition becomes particularly relevant in the case of Bangkok, where the majority of the workforce, so over 50%, is informally employed. And that means they often lack access to financial resources, any structured training opportunities. So when we speak about a just transition in terms of leaving no one behind, it's especially the case here. Last couple of slides on this analysis. So we also spoke to workers themselves, whether at our working group events or at the companies directly. And we conducted some surveys. I think there are some key gaps that we identified, one of which on the left is to do with safety. Many workers are reporting low or only some confidence in handling these high voltage systems, but in some circumstances are forced to do so anyway. I think another interesting point that we found is that the income change after transitioning into an EV role doesn't necessarily increase. So there are a lack of incentives currently for workers to upskill. And finally, on training, access is still very uneven. So we found that the majority of training is currently delivered through firms, larger employers, manufacturers, etc. But there are still many barriers that exist for people not formally employed. As I said before, that is the majority of the population in Bangkok. Some of those barriers include time constraints, travel distance, the limited availability of vocational courses. And I think this is one thing that SCAP are trying to overcome with the design and implementation of our vocational training course later this year. Final slide then. So to wrap up, what we're hearing is a few consistent messages, which I've categorized in 4 ways. The first is there is already a skills gap, and there are immediate shortages in areas like high voltage safety. Not only does that constrain the transition, but it also poses real safety risks to the people involved. And second, there's an access gap. Workers in formal systems can access training, while informal workers and underrepresented groups face barriers to do with time and cost. Then there's the incentive gap, because while EV jobs are more technically demanding, they don't always offer higher incomes. So there's not always that motivation or realization that the transitioning is happening fast, and that at some point they will need to reskill or upskill. And finally, there's a coordination gap. I think Thailand is one country which has many effective national strategies delegated among many ministries. I mean, the Ministry of Labour is in charge of training for electric mobility. But these certification systems and delivery, especially at the city level here in Bangkok, is still developing, and there's some coordination to go on there. So we're quite excited about the rest of the year. We have some quite exciting outputs coming up. I mentioned that we'll release the impact analysis soon. We have a toolkit, a step-by-step guide on how to implement a just transition, and then of course the vocational training course. So if anyone is interested, you may scan the QR code. It should take you to our project website. But I'll leave it there, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jack. This was a very insightful overview as well on your work in Bangkok. So thanks so much for sharing. I especially like this that you brought up the informality of the workforce. I think this is the case in many of the countries that we also are looking at today, and where ADB works. And I think this is really key to consider in any kind of just transition or reskilling planning, and also for raising the safety risks relating to EVs and managing EVs. That's definitely something that needs to be considered better for sure when looking at this transition. I think there was a question on earlier on the timeline for Kathleen, but I think you also mentioned very nicely that there is this kind of we need to manage both immediate needs as well as future needs to ensure that skill sets are matching those needed in the field. So that was also a good point, and I think Kathleen will be answering the question in the Q&A that was directly directed at her in written form. So you'll see it. You should be able to see it there. But let's jump into the panel discussion. We don't have too much time actually for the discussion, but I think these presentations have been extremely insightful, really detailed, really good examples of what to consider when planning for reskilling. So thanks so much for these the presentations. Well, let's try to get through a couple of questions as well for the panelists. So I'll start with one directed at Diana. So we have heard and seen that many countries do understand the need to reshape jobs. However, how can governments in Asia and the Pacific anticipate these kind of longer term, especially looking at the longer term, but also the medium term, kind of what needs will be coming, and more proactively plan for this reskilling challenge? I think it's another question on the timing aspect here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Joanna. And I really enjoyed everyone's presentations. Thank you so much for sharing. I was taking notes, and lots of thoughts and ideas coming to my head, just like thinking through some of those implications and aspects. And as Jack said, so much learning also across the different markets. And I also see some of the themes. So I think when we think about how can governments actually anticipate or be really the lookout, so many of those strategies were highlighted here. So we talked about how fast-paced this change is, how much we need to be, I think one critical thing is to be thinking about different potential scenarios. Sometimes I've seen that, we might be completely kind of thinking about this is the projected uptake for EVs, right? And because we've seen how fast these things can change in terms of the market trend, the industry, how fast it can move, or sometimes can also face headwinds, which is also an issue in several markets. The point here is that I think planning around different potential scenarios that are, give you a spectrum of what the types of needs might be for those jobs and for those skills. I think also thinking through different types of modalities, and several of the co-panelists talked about different types of trainings as well, right? Different types of credentialing, shorter term training. So really hitting all of the above to be able to have a breadth of offerings that can lead to having the workforce that is needed. And then another key theme that also was highlighted by several of us is, of course, the collaboration with industry. If you are not close to industry, to understanding what needs and where the industry, local industry is going that really is going to translate into placement, right? Job placements for the technicians, for the people, the workers that we are trying to upskill and reskill. So as we're thinking about training the workers, where are they going, right? Like knowing that other part of where that pathway, what that looks like, I believe that's only possible with intensive collaboration with employers. And I love Kat's examples, and of course, several others as well, Gita as well. Like it takes so much, and of course, Bo in Indonesia, of communicating with companies, understanding where this is headed. So I think thinking through all of that, what are the key stakeholders and the mechanisms to be able to get as much information as possible ahead of time and understanding where the technology is going, right? And then for every country will be different. How is your industry set up? Do you, I do a lot of work in Mexico, as you know, where I'm from. So it's an export market. Where are your customers headed? If your customers are already headed there, and we see that also between Africa and the EU and many other places, right? That's what you need to anticipate, and you're seeing that. So I believe it requires significant, just kind of like labor market intelligence, foresight, thinking through, and then really, really intensive collaboration with private sector.
Thanks so much, Diana. Yes, I think we're coming back to the same themes in all presentations and here as well regarding the understanding the needs is the stakeholder engagement, stakeholder dialogue. I think Jack had a good example of this working group in Bangkok with different stakeholders. Kat also mentioned that they have weekly meetings with the industry. So I think that really shows that the importance of dialogue. So dialogue across stakeholders, across organizations, but then how about dialogue with workers and the communities themselves? How can countries ensure that the workers have a voice in shaping this transition in terms of training programs and reskilling? Are there examples of effective social dialogue in the region? Perhaps this one could go to Afrodita or whoever wants to take this, but Afrodita and Bowo, for example.
Yeah, Afrodita first, I think.
Happy to take this one.
You
Okay.
go first,
Yeah.
Afrodita.
Sure, thank you. So, being involved in this work has made me realize that while we have EV adoption targets, it's time we probably move on from EV adoption targets to EV workforce readiness targets, right? That would be one shift that will enable us to think about workers, all workers in particular. So the workers that are at most risk are informal workers. So I would say mechanics, informal recyclers as well, component workers and MSMEs. So these are the ones that right now stand to lose out from the transition unless they have structured skilling pathways to upskill them, right? So building access by bringing these workers into consultations before decisions are being made is very important. So what would work is structured social dialogue platforms with informal workers and MSME workers, having local consultations in automotive clusters before rolling out skilling programs. And after rolling out skilling programs, we should have a strong feedback loops from trainees and technicians as well, so that we can strengthen these programs simultaneously and do any course correction measures if needed, right? While I'm unable to give a specific example of let's say creating this sort of access, I can think of a policy example here. So one of the Indian states, Tamil Nadu, has its own EV policy, and that EV policy is a very explicit example of a state embedding workforce transition directly into industrial policy. So what they do is they provide a concrete model. So every automotive company is eligible for an upskilling allowance up to 10% of the existing workforce on the EV production line. So they will get subsidies of, let's say, up to 4,000 INR per worker for 6 months for upskilling them. And this quantum of the subsidy increases if the worker is a woman or a person from a backward community or a person with disability or a transgender. So this is a very clear policy signal to say that we need to prioritize upskilling initiatives, especially for vulnerable communities and vulnerable workforce.
Thank you so much, Prajita, for this very practical example as well. Bowo, did you want to add something
Yeah,
to?
yeah. In Indonesia, we are still early, compared to what happened in Prajita's country in India. Indonesia, we have 400,000 independent workshop, ICE workshop. Unfortunately, the population of EV is still very limited, still less than 3% as for now. And it's very difficult to, to make them understand the importance of the upskilling. If we are talking to the traditional EV workshop, for example, because they have plenty of market in ICE in Indonesia compared to EV. But I'm happy to tell you that there are several, a group of EV independent technician already taking place in Indonesia, and they are independent technician who make host calls, not becoming a workshop like ICE workshop, but they personally service the host calls from customers, and they are the one who taking the benefit of the market as for now. Our approach is more constructing, and we want to enter the vocational ecosystem, and it is just starting. So hopefully within next year we can have more dialogue with the EV technicians.
Thank you, Boa. This is also a very good practical example, and yes, it's a huge sector. This whole mechanics and repair and maintenance, which we really need to ensure that we hear from them. Looking at gender aspects, Kathleen, you mentioned that you've done some research and studies on that in your project. So the e-mobility transition can really be seen as an opportunity to include more women in the workforce. How would you recommend that countries ensure that skills development efforts are actually gender inclusive? Any practical advice on this?
Okay, thanks. I will talk about our experience. No? So, very timely question because we just had our March kapihan coffee consultation, and I just have like remember these 5 points I want to share, and we learned that in inclusivity, women engagement, it starts with really intentional design. It took us weeks, months to think through where do we pursue women in engagement in all of this, in what we're doing? Because, I remember our focus was on industry development. So we would hear stories about like women as a public transport user, et cetera, et cetera. But how about in the micro credentials? Like, where do we do that? But what we learned was that, countries need to, and also our experience, that countries need to embed that gender responsive approaches into every stage of skills development, from curriculum design to outreach and to implementation. And I'm personally still learning from my colleagues, Mark, our gender focal, and Bianca on this. We have recently created the first cohort of grassroots women network for women in e-mobility, focusing workforce development, but it's not exclusively for women. Men were there as our allies. Yeah, so that network is like we don't know how to call it because that's not women in e-mobility, no. But some practical advice that we've heard on enhancing inclusion was look into the scholarships or financial incentives for women. Look into the mentorship opportunities to support their career progression. The male as allies concept was key there because they understand their role in fostering that inclusive workplace, and also in the knowledge transfer, because many of our technicians are male, no? So they understand like we also want to be there to teach, to help, no? And the last is campaign. I think that was key. The campaign to challenge stereotype and showcase the women who are already there in the automotive sector, even not EV, but just who are already out there. That might help shift the cultural perceptions and encourage them to, let's say, enroll maybe 1 or 2 years from now as we institutionalize this. So those are like some key practical advice that we've also gathered from that consultation.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Yeah, it really interesting insights, and I really like this men as allies concept, because obviously it's not just to work with women. We need to engage the whole of society in this inclusivity work. So thanks for that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I have one more question to Jack. Many countries are now looking at how to start mapping skills and doing these pathways. Maybe as a summary also of the discussion in general, can you give some concrete advice on where should countries get started with mapping, with creating pathways, etc., for just transition and reskilling?
Thanks, Johanna. Yes, I'll be quick. So I think in practice, skills mapping is not a single exercise that can be done by any one party. It's a process that requires inputs from multiple sides. So as I explained in Bangkok, what we've done is we've started with the areas where there is clear responsibility and influence of the local government. So we developed this urban EV value chain to focus on installation, operation, maintenance, and end of life, areas where the local authority and the training systems within them can realistically act. And I think this matters because what we noticed is that responsibility is often split. So the national ministries, for example, oversee manufacturing development, or in Bangkok's case, the rollout of public transport. But cities are dealing with urban planning and other areas related to operations and service sectors. I think what's interesting at the national level is what we found in Thailand. Many manufacturers, especially coming over from China, operate in relatively closed systems. So there's actually limited spillover into the broader workforce, as technological knowledge spillover. And this is another reason why we on our project have focused more on the downstream activities where jobs and things are more accessible. And so I think those are some considerations that can be taken into mapping. So I think to summarize, the approach is quite phased. First, perhaps define the segments you can influence, then engage stakeholders across those segments. And build knowledge products, get the data to identify the gaps and make a real case for the interventions that should be made.
Thank you so much, Jack. And I think this was also a very good summary of many of the discussions as well we've had, or that we heard also from the presentations. Unfortunately, I think we have to cut our discussion here as we're already a bit over time. But I think this, maybe as a summary also from my side, what I hear is a lot of stakeholder engagement, partnerships building across organizations, governments, private sector, listening to the private sector, talking to them, talking to the communities and the workers themselves as well, and ensuring that the approaches are inclusive of gender and, of course, other aspects as well, including informal workforce and such. So, well, I would like to extend a huge thanks to all of our participants, and a very special thanks to our speakers, our panelists, Diana, Prajida, Bowo, Kathleen, and Jack. Thanks so much for joining us in this session and for your really insightful inputs to the discussion. So thanks. Maybe just a couple of words at the end. So please join us for our upcoming webinar, the next one taking place on the 22nd of April. You can see here on the screen, empowering women as drivers of change in the e-mobility sector, 2 p.m. Manila time. We'll share the recording of this and the other webinars as soon as possible on our website. And you can also provide us feedback on this webinar using the QR code that will come on the screen very soon. I think if you could, yes, thank you. So you can also include in your feedback any topics you want to hear about. We're happy to cater for inputs also from yourselves, what you want to hear about. So I hope to see you in our upcoming events. Until then, take care, and thank you so much. And thanks again to our panelists. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.